Shoutouts to MBT chat. Give him lots of love in O7s. He's having a pretty hard time right now. I hope everything's well with him. Since we're talking about bad decks as a concept, I want to also talk about good decks. Been speaking with peeps about this. I think Yu-Gi-Oh players are not only unwilling to face that their favorites are unplayably bad, they're also terrible at determining what's good. All right, so this is the opposite end of the spectrum. We're talking about what decks are bad and how do you measure what is considered a bad deck. How do you define a bad deck? Well, let's talk about what is considered a good deck. Magic's modern format, which... Oh, this guy does not shut up about the wizard game. Modern format, which I've always felt was analogous to YGO, is in a historic state of stagnation. Though there's a clear best deck, there's still upwards of 30 decks that players expect to win events and respect when entering a tournament. No one cares about Magic, old man. From conversation I had with good Yu-Gi-Oh players, they're considering maybe 6 total decks during preparation. I don't think this is wrong. It's absolutely the right way to conduct prep because the community 100% will not meaningfully experiment outside those parameters. By the way, this has been generally the theme for the last, like, 5 years or so, outside of maybe, like, Tira-Shizu. There has been, like, consistently, like, 5, like, we're talking, like, YCS winning capable decks. Not even just, like, strong meta contenders that can consistently top a YCS or go deep in a YCS. Like, we're talking, like, decks that can win a YCS. Like, that, there's been, like, constantly for the last, like, couple years, like, 5+ decks. Things move so fast and releases are frequent now that the large majority of Yu-Gi-Oh! Public defaults to the opinion of content creators. Do they? I don't know how true this is. I don't know how true this is. There's a reason that tier list videos and best hand trap this format is one of the most popular videos of on YouTube. If you go and like compare that to any content creator's standard YouTube videos, I think Kali Effect is pretty popular for them, for example, for tier lists and top tier list of hand traps this format. They are very, you know, popular in that way. But I don't know how much of this really influence. Content creators influence the average player a lot, probably, but definitely not the top end players. Like that is 100% just not true. YCS results, which is natural. I think that's like the #1 thing that people will always look towards when determining what a good deck is, right? Because there have been so many good decks that are like almost good enough to top YCSs, but no one will listen to them or care about them because they aren't capable of like getting that YCS result. And there's a couple of reasons for this, which we might touch on if he brings it up later. But there's plenty of decks that are like capable of topping YCSs, but they don't have the right players playing them, or they've just, you know, naturally... if one person enters an event with Generator, the chances of them topping, no matter how good they are, even if the deck is amazing, they can still not top, right? Because of consistency, you can get unlucky. But if 1,000 people enter a YCS with Blackwings, you're going to see a lot of Blackwing in top cut. Is it because Blackwing is a good deck? Well, no, because it's just the natural conversion of if you throw enough shit at the wall, something's going to stick. A nebulous recency bias, there's no rotation, so every new set has to contain the best cards, right? I don't know if that is completely true. I think people usually just play what is best recently in terms of, like, results rather than sets. Not to jerk off Baldriad every single time I talk about anything, but the metagame I don't know what that means. But the metagame professed by those results and opinions becomes the new metagame, regardless of where the power in the format actually lies. This is just like natural human conditioning, right? Like you're always going to be more favorable to your recent result. Like anyone here who's ever sat down and done like an actual testing session in Yu-Gi-Oh, no matter what you tell yourself, no matter what you say to yourself, you're always going to like feel better about your deck when you win games. Even if you don't really deep dive and analyze those games and think to yourself, well, technically I only really won because I drew like the hard one-off Duster twice, etc., etc., right? Like, so you're, even though, like, you might have things like that are anomalies in your testing, your natural instinct as a player is always to, like, look favorably on positive results, regardless of how you view those. And that can be with regards to the performance of cards, the performance of your deck, and how good you do well in a tournament, etc., right? Like, you could take, like, the best deck. This is really funny. I was talking to Jordan about this recently. The week that he topped a YCS, he went like X2 drop at like a local. Well, not drop, but, you know, he went 2-2 at a locals. Took that basically the same deck list and then topped a YCS. Do you know what I mean? And that's how, like, being a good player, you're supposed to, like, eliminate that sort of recency bias and then take that forward as a learning outcome, or analyze and deep dive and be like, okay, why did I lose? Was it actually because of being unlucky? Is the deck genuinely performing badly? a lot of people will literally take their deck to a locals, do well with it, and think it's somehow ready for a YCS. And that happens in the opposite regard. Anyway, that's just a little bit talking about the recency bias and stuff like that. Let's get back on topic of talking about what a good deck is. Unchained is the best deck because the build of Unchained popularized via the top players has the best matchup spread versus what top players have decided are the other top decks and then popularized those builds. Who knows, the Unchained of today could easily be the quick draw Dandy Warrior of 2035, because formats move so fast and releases are frequent, we'll never have the time to tune or the ability to test the hundreds of good decks that could secretly be insane. For anyone that doesn't know what this is trying to refer to here, so you know how Quick Draw Dandy was the best deck of Edison format? I think I'm getting the format right there, or is that Tengu Plant technically? Basically, Quick Draw Dandy was seen as like the best deck of its format, right? Tengu, right? It was seen as the best format of its time. But then, in retrospect, now that everyone has been playing Edison, that deck is not that good, right? But it was historically seen as the best deck, because when you have so many people playing a specific format, Edison, playtesting that format with so many different decks and archetypes, and just the learned power that comes with social media and the advancements of the interconnectedness of Duelists in 2023, you're naturally going to come up with new decks, new engines, new strategies that are actually going to end up being better than what was played historically at the time. I'm sure if we were to pick a random format in the last, like, 4 years, and then played it to the extent that people play Edison for years to come afterwards, people can, in hindsight, retrospectively realize, oh, wait a minute, you know, Sword Soul was actually incredibly miles ahead of every other deck. Or, you know, Tearlament Ishizu was tier 0 at the time, right? But maybe somehow people will find a way to make other decks actually significantly more powerful and maybe make it a 2-deck format, you know, etc., etc. Probably not with tier Ishizu, but the point I'm making here is, like, in hindsight, when there's enough testing involved, you will find decks. And the point he's making here, basically, is that because the formats and the events and etc., blah, 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 move on so fast in this day and age, you're never really going to settle for, or you're never really going to come to that conclusion of what the best deck is in this day and age, because formats, products, etc. come out so fast that generally, just because of raw time, why would a top player test something like Generator? Why would Jesse, Cotton, or Pac, or Josh ever bother testing Generator, right? When that deck is legitimately playable and legitimately strong, right? Because there's just, like, other options that are just slightly better, and they warrant more time and effort testing than something like Fluffle, right? And Fluffle is a very good example. You guys should go watch my Fluffle video with Skyhawk. It's absolutely insane. That deck can put up like 10 disruptions through 3 hand traps. It's unbelievable. But why would anyone test that deck, right? It's hard to play. It's very just awkward to build sometimes. And why would you go through all of that time and effort when you just have something simpler in this day and age like Unchained, which the decks, you know, those kind of decks generally sort of just build themselves. The combos and stuff, etc. are unique and spread and different enough to the point that they're learnable, but not so YOLO like Fluffle that it would make it viable. So the point I'm making here is, like, there's plenty of rogue decks such as that are very viable and very good, but there isn't enough of a backing of people willing to try and test and play those decks for it to ever perform well, regardless of how good those decks actually are. Fluffle, Generator, these are great examples of rogue decks that are super powerful, but just don't have that initiative behind them by the player base. Nimuxin, thank you for the Twitch Prime. Ardur, thank you for the resub. I literally think there are somewhere between 20 and 50 decks that could win a YCS tomorrow given the right pilot and set of circumstances. Pac could have won with Infernoble, Triff could have won with Manadium, Linny won a remote regional with Generator. There are so many, but I can guarantee 100% because they're not on content creators' radars, they won't get labbed to the extent Unchained did. They won't end up in testing circles rotations, and there won't be buzz about them, and potential pilots will pass them over for something on an MBT tier list. Okay, relax there, buddy. I think you're overestimating your influence on the competitive top tier metagame, Joseph. But anyway, it's true insofar as the amount of testing required to make something like Fluffle, Generator, blah 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 be good and be relevant is it's like, why would you bother doing that when there's already, like, if you have like 5 tier 1 recognized decks right now, you would probably better spend efficiently your time testing and building those top tier decks like Unchained, Rescue Ace, Manadium. What else is good right now? I feel like there's another option. Pearly. It's better. use
As
of your
in Middle of
time
Dharma
to
can't
try
have
and
none of
perfect
that
those decks than
cheese
to really
walk.
try put the time and effort to find something completely out of left field is basically the point. So anyway, what is a good deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! TLDR? Well, I mean, generally because of the problem that exists with Yu-Gi-Oh's, shall we say, narrow form of gameplay, which is current format, advanced constructed is the only way to play it, then that is basically all you're really getting is, can a deck consistently top a YCS and can it win? If it doesn't fall under this specific exact niche criteria, the deck is useless, bad, and unplayable. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, that's basically it. So, I think we need like another format to make other decks more recognizable and more viable, and then naturally there will be a bleeding over for people to potentially test and try those decks in real life. I've personally experienced that myself. I played Punk Bestial, a deck I've never touched in TCG. I tried it in Master Duel, and because I really liked the way it performed in Master Duel, I took it to locals and I played it, and I had a great time. But that doesn't happen often enough because Master Duel, being one way to play Yu-Gi-Oh, is still very similar to the TCG in the sense that it just follows the same timeline, but maybe like 5 months beforehand. So if there was different formats, people might potentially fall in love with other decks, fall in love with other archetypes, and then recognize, hey, hang on, this actually has potential here. Let's try and make this work, etc., etc. All right, anyway, that's enough on this topic. Thank you.